Propaganda is something that anyone can encounter at any time of their lives. If one would ask the people just passing by that in what form propaganda is being carried out, most people will probably say that it is something that is done by speeches, gestures in motion, and so on and so forth. As you can see in the photographs taken by Szymanski from Associated Press, we can see the former US President Donald Trump and current US President Joe Biden in a state of conflict in order to win more votes with their speeches and gestures. But what if propaganda is not only carried by these? Good evening to you all. I hope you're all fine. I'm Onur Balmahmut and I'm currently a sophomore at the Department of Architecture at METU. Today I'm going to give a brief presentation about propaganda's relationship with art. How does art become a medium for these aims? What specifically are the features of it that is being used for propaganda? After all, propaganda is something that, in a way, coexists with our contemporary lives as it did in the past. Propaganda and art are two entities that are frequently used together, and this has been so throughout the history. This means one can call this as a propaganda art as a single phrase. When we observe propaganda art, we can see that it has its own specialities in terms of its narrative and style. One can further observe that the narrative of propaganda art is actually quite refined and purpose-built. When it comes to the style, it can be seen that it is distinctive and iconic. I will further explain these. Firstly, as I just said, the narrative of propaganda art is one of the main features of it. It usually is created and shaped in a strong and impactful way, so that the message or the story or simply the idea can be transferred. As you can see in the photograph that is taken from German Federal Archive, there are some Germans that are reading and looking to the visual materials that are used in the bulletin board. There are many indicators that show the time is during the Nazi regime, and there are also many indicators that this propaganda has been successful, judging by how people are gathered there. It is undeniable that the regime was able to transfer their ideas. So how the narrative of propaganda art can be this successful? Moore, a designer from London, says in his work named Propaganda Prints, A History of Art in the Service of Social and Political Change that, quote, "To a country exhausted by war and corruption, the man on the white horse emerged as a savior. So the feelings of the people are the main force. It can be used, like Moore's example, or in a different context as well." These two illustrations are from the United States Library of Congress and Office for Emergency Management. The first one, created in World War I, is a well-known poster of Uncle Sam. As you can see, he is used as a symbol for patriotism. On the other hand, the second illustration, created in World War II, uses a Japanese representation with a devious look and an insidious hand gesture. These two illustrations take their subject in different aspects, but the way they are using positive and negative emotions is very similar. After being able to impact people, the narrative also needs to be purpose-built. Some people would even consider advertisement posters of brands like McDonald's are also the works of propaganda. Especially judging by this part, the poster has a very solid aim and it wants people to buy the product. Secondly, the art style is another main feature of propaganda art. It creates a pathway for the transfer of the idea. The painting you see at the left is a painting named American Gothic by Wood. As you can see, its style is formed in a way that it has no aim of propaganda. Welch, a professor of modern history from the University of Kent, explained in his book World War II Propaganda, Analyzing the Art of Persuasion During Wartime, that propaganda is highly related with the concept of brainwashing. The main idea is to get in the minds of people and do this by simplified but effective visual elements. In the second visual at the right, it is called Beat the Whites with the Red Wedge, created by Lisitsky in the Russian Civil War. The visual elements are very simple, but they impose a clear message to get rid of the White Army. These two visuals give us an idea about how distinct propaganda art is compared to art. However, it may not be enough to get in the minds of people, but also stay there. Propaganda art, with all of its forms, such as logos, posters, and etc., all aim to do this. Stoll, an artist and founder of New World Summit, says in his work, Propaganda Art in the 21st Century, that I will explore a short history of the relation between propaganda and democracy, aiming to demythologize the idea that liberal and capitalist democracies are somehow beyond propaganda. This quotation implies that propaganda can exceed itself. The ultimate aim of propaganda is to create icons, to coexist with the history and contemporary times, while the propaganda continues to affect people in many ways. The compilation you see is taken from an article written by Greggs and published by PR Week. It is a compilation of the logos of the major parties in the United Kingdom. Each of those parties had their history, had their influences, and their logos are perfect examples of how their propaganda created icons and continued to use them as a medium. In conclusion, I have tried to explain the main features of propaganda art in terms of its narrative and art style. Propaganda can be of any forms and scales. Not all propaganda may result in negative results, but there is certainly a relation. The figure you see is from Sotirovich's Propaganda and Journalism. It shows the number of articles containing the word propaganda and the phrase fake news in New York Times from 1900 to 2017. As you can see, the number increases specifically around interwar period, the Second World War, which were very destructive events, and you can also see another spike, implying another increase for today's world. I think we should be careful and willing to consider about propaganda and propaganda art in order to acknowledge ourselves about the potential dangers that the future may hold. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Here's a list of the references I used throughout the presentation.